I want to end my remarks by urging all members on this committee to stand with us, to stand with survivors and with the NCTR in ensuring that the truth of residential school institutions cannot and will not be denied and forgotten.
Elder Cameron, for your very powerful remarks. We'll now open the floor to senators for questions. And I'll go to my deputy chair, Senator Renaud. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, Miigwetchin, thank you to Elder Barb for your words. I do want to share a few details of the NCTR's ongoing work, including some of those positive developments that Elder has mentioned. The NCTR has a unique mandate and responsibility. We are the stewards of all survivor statements gathered during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as an extraordinary collection of documents and sacred items that continues to grow daily. We are the leading national institution supporting academic research on residential schools, and we are working every day with survivors, nations, and grassroots movements across the country to raise awareness of the missing children. The NCTR currently holds about 4 million records. The NCTR is tasked with making these records available to survivors, their families, communities, researchers, and educators. We are also required to balance concerns about privacy and consent, and the work of cataloging these records and reviewing them for disclosure is monumental and ongoing. Since 2021, there has been an incredible increase in volume of requests for records from survivors, and frankly, we've been overwhelmed by the number and pace of requests, leading to the very regrettable delays in processing these requests. I am pleased to relate, however, that the federal government's 2022 commitment of long-term sustained core funding has enabled us to significantly expand our capacity. By the end of this month, the NCTR archives will have eliminated the backlog in requests, leading to a much reduced time for survivors and communities to receive copies of their records. The NCTR has also been undertaking a systematic review of the records in our care to fit all the pieces together. It's a very, very large puzzle right now, and tell a more complete story of the children who never did return home. In 2019, we worked with survivors and communities to create the National Student Memorial Register to honor all the children. There currently are 4,128 children included on the register, and you can read their names on our website and on the memorial banner that we share yearly. As a result of our detailed review of more than 2 million records to date, the NCTR will soon be announcing a significant number of new names to that register. That work is not finished, and it's ongoing. The honourable senators will be aware that the Government of Canada and various religious archives who ran the schools failed to disclose all the records to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Recent agreements with the federal government with the religious orders include the Oblates are starting to rectify this. It's been a very, very long process, and we're going into year 8 since the end of the mandate of the TRC ended. We know that millions of additional records will be provided to the NCTR and through us to survivors, families, and communities. We're currently working with the federal government, which will release another estimated 10 to 15 million records to the NCTR. So you can imagine the truth that is yet to come. We're concerned not only with the records created by the schools and the government, but with any documents, evidence that help shine a light on this complex history. I particularly want to recognize the National Film Board of Canada, who has entered into an agreement with the NCTR to review their significant archives to identify and catalog relevant records and share copies with us. This includes working on a digital preservation of all 7,000 plus survivor statements gathered during the TRC so that they're available for decades to come. The NCTR continues the work of recording statements from residential school survivors, many of whom have never told their oral histories before. We have worked closely with the Independent Special Interlocutor's Office of Kimberly Murray to ensure all survivors have access to this resource at the national events as she completes her work. As more and more communities take the research into residential schools missing children, we are supporting them in developing the tools and protocols they need to secure data for their future use. I'd like to highlight the National Advisory Committee on Residential Schools Missing Children and Unmarked Burials. The committee, which was established last year through a partnership through NCTR and Crown Indigenous Relations, brings together an extraordinary range of survivors and Indigenous expertise in all issues related to the search of missing children. The information being shared by this committee helps address a critical need that we have heard expressed by Indigenous communities across the country. The NCTR has also recently partnered with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council to respond to Call to Action 65, which called for a national research program to advance understanding of reconciliation. The Reconciliation Network will fund, led by Indigenous researchers working with Indigenous communities, and contribute to our collective understanding of truth and reconciliation. These projects may look at the history of residential schools, the legacy of colonial policies in areas including child welfare, education, language, culture, health, and justice. The NCTR will act as a hub for these individual projects, bringing them together into a network of researchers working towards reconciliation in Canada. The NCTR will further play a role in amplifying the work of the projects to a broad audience and increasing the impacts of the research. Public education and engagement is also an area where our work has grown very rapidly over the last few years. Our education unit, which is very small, 3 people that serves the country, carries out about 2 to 3 engagements every week. In 2022, the NCTR held more than 200 education sessions with 125 unique organizations, conferences, education booths, presentations, workshops, lunch and learns, dialogues, and film screenings. One of our most successful outreach programs is called Imagine a Canada. This initiative invites Canadian youth from kindergarten to grade 12 nationally to express their vision of reconciliation through art, essays, and multimedia. We also invite proposals from older students for school and community activities, which we can fund. The NCTR has always partnered in activities around Orange Shirt Day. Now, with recognition of that day as a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, opportunities have grown exponentially. We refer to it as Truth and Reconciliation Week. Online programming reached over 30,000 educators in French, English, and Indigenous languages, representing over 1 million students from coast to coast, and we do that on an annual basis. We held a 5,000 in-person student empowerment event where they had access to survivors, and we also shared the memorial banner. And it was an incredible moment as we carried the cloth that holds almost just over 4,000 names. And as I walked by these young people, many of whom were newcomers in the audience and high school age, you know, as the cloth came by, they were praying and they had tears. So I know that those children's spirits were speaking from beyond, and they're making a change because we're engaging at a younger age, and they can carry those stories forth on behalf of those ones that did not come home. A national broadcast in partnership also happens on September 30th in partnership with APTN, CBC, independent broadcasters, news and social media coverage, and the reach is 12.5 million per year. So Canadians have access through news, television, as well. This year, the theme of Truth and Reconciliation Week from September 25th to 30th will be themed Honoring the Resilience of Survivors. The high demand for NCTR's work is a positive sign. It means that there's change, there is hope for change in this country. I want to reiterate that we cannot meet this demand without long-term sustainable funding that has been provided by the Government of Canada. It's been a long journey, and we didn't receive that until last year. And we also have continued support of our institutional partner and host, the University of Manitoba. The NCTR is a permanent mandate to record, preserve, and share the truth of the residential school history. The Honourable Murray Sinclair, one of 3 NCTR elders in residence, has said that reconciliation is the work of generations. We know that the ongoing work is going to take decades to come. The NCTR will be here to do that work. And I want to honor all of the NCTR staff, Survivor Circle, and Governing Circle that continue to work tirelessly with survivors and for survivors. I want to conclude by saying that we are also very grateful for Canada's commitment to support the construction of a permanent home for the NCTR in keeping with our unique mandate and responsibility. We received a sizable contribution from the federal government, but we still have a long way to go. We anticipate another $40 million capital fundraising, which will take place very soon. But we are committed because we know that we are here with survivors, our elders and knowledge keepers. And I just want to say miigwech for your time and for the invitation to come to you today. Miigwech.
Thank you for your remarks, Ms. Scott. We'll now go to Senator Tanis, followed by Senator Adet.
Thank you for being here today. Ms. Scott, you mentioned that there are still organizations, people with data that you have not been turned over to you. I wonder what, we all want to do things. We want to help. And part of helping is listening and talking and so on, but sometimes part of help that we can do is actually to do something. Here in the Senate, we do have the ability to hold oversight hearings. We can compel people to come and testify before us. What would you think if you gave us the names and the contacts for organizations that aren't providing data, and we'll haul them up here in public and we'll ask them why?
I would love for you to do that. I mean, we've been waiting a long time, and I think it's absolutely crucial that when Tecumloops happened and the children began to speak from beyond, that's when the world changed for us and the landscape changed. We used to have to do a lot of reaching out across the country, developing partnerships, still trying to acquire different records. We have worked closely. I think it's time. The time is now. The time could be today that you call upon those people, and I'd be more than willing to share that information with you. We've done a public media campaign, and I mean, there are no secrets. Everything has been public, and we all know what's happened here, many of us at this table. So if you're willing to do that, I respectfully would ask you to help.
I certainly would advocate for that. If you want to send the clerk for future discussions, the name of the, let's say, the 3 most flagrant and obvious resistors, we could start maybe there and talk about it as a group. All senators would have to agree that was the kind of meeting that we were going to have. But to me, it's there's a time for action, and as Senator Arnott mentioned, we're not going to get anywhere until we get all the data. We won't get to the full and complete truth, which is what all Canadians should want, and it's the only way we're going to move forward. So thank you. That's the only question I have.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Senator Tanis. Now we'll go to Senator Adet, followed by Senator Arnott.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous encourager là, de... Thank you very much. And I'd encourage you to use interpretation. This is a subject that is a very emotional one. First of all, thank you very much to the Chair for having done things differently today. We left you with time to talk to us about your reality, and that's very important in this space. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you to my colleagues for having asked very good questions and made very good comments. I would just like to thank you on behalf of my mother. Every day we carry this trauma, and I am proud to see Indigenous men and women with such power, so that my mother can finally get the truth. And the 28 families that today have truth following what happened when their babies were apprehended in Menuan. The work that you're doing today is important for our healing. And I thank you. I thank you because these are my friends and my family. Thank you for being strong in such a colonial space. And thanks to you and my colleagues, we can heal. So thank you. You have a friend and you have an ally. So I thank you very much.
I get a huggy, but I don't know what's appropriate in this colonial structure, but miigwech.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Senator Arnott?
Thank you, Senator Francis. And I start by saying the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation has such an important role to play in the future of this country. And I believe in the power of education. And it sounds to me like you don't have enough resources to do the kind of education that is required actually to fight things like the deniers, to give people the truth. And I'm wondering what comment you might have about what we can do to support anything you want us to do, as Senator Tanis has given a really good example, but particularly on education, because I think the education of the non-Indigenous people in Canada is really critical to moving forward. You are well placed to be able to create curricular resources from K to 12 or university level. I mean, you can take it wherever, but I'm just wondering what you might say about that and what we can do to help on that, or any other issue that you think we should be focusing on to support your work. Thank you.
Education is absolutely key. Every year, we come back to the table for project funding. We continue to fight for the dollars. We knock on every door possible to raise an annual budget of just over $1 million in order to do the work that we need to do. When you talk about $1 million and we're reaching 12.5 million Canadians, you know, you have to equate that per person. And if you divide that, it's very minimal. Frankly, you know, it's difficult. It's a distraction for us to continue to come back to the table, but we do it because we're working with the survivors and elders every day, and we know that that's the way forward. And I can tell you that some of the most incredible, emotional, hopeful programming is with the young generation, because when you sit with them and you ask them what they see going forward and how the country can repair itself, they have done phenomenal work. And I wish that I could bring them to this committee, because they write poetry, they write art, they share it with their families. The young children I see know more than their parents did, more than I did. You know, I was taken at birth from my community and didn't find my way home till I was 28 years of age. So every day I'm learning. I was 52 when I found out who my father was. My mother had such a difficult time sharing that information. So you have to think about the decades of work that we need to do. And that's just one person, one experience, and one story. But I think the fact that if you could pressure and call those people, you know, to the table again and ask them to help do our work. The fact that we have, you know, a 3-person education unit at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, but have been doing phenomenal. We have a young education lead. Her name is Kayla Johnston, and she came to us as a student at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and has continued her work. She's literally grown up with us, and I get chills when I speak about her, because I know one day she's going to take my job, and I totally support that, because she's got an incredible corporate history. But I think, you know, keeping the pressure on the government to help support the NCTR is number one. And, you know, we've been very frugal. We've got partner after partner, and we won't stop, because we know the importance of the work has to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, Senator Coyle, followed by Senator Lapkin-Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Yes, you've asked us to stand with you, Ms. Cameron, and that's definitely my intention, and I think you hopefully feel that from the rest of the group around this not quite circle. Let's pretend it's a circle. And I just want to thank both of you for your testimony and the critical work that you're doing. I'm really struck by the point that you've made about denialism, and we've heard a little bit about this. This is really serious. You just described it as, fake news, right? Including people with power. And it's hurtful, it's damaging, and it's frankly really dangerous. Anyway, I'm very concerned to hear what you're saying. We, the Senate of Canada, have had our own internal issue of denialism in our ranks, which has passed. But, that really struck a very difficult chord with us in our house, in our chamber. So we're not immune to it. You've mentioned, and we know and appreciate how education, school programs, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, powerful, really powerful for getting the truth out and as antidotes to that denialism. But I'd like to unpack this a little bit more with you, if you could. Could you tell us a little bit more about the nature and anything you know about the sources of the denialism and their possible links, because we're seeing this on a number of things, to broader misinformation and disinformation campaigns, and what else you might suggest as actions to counter that?
If I may, I'll just ask Barb to speak about actions, what she would see from survivor perspective, and then I can tell you about a little bit of our engagement at the NCTR and where it comes from.
There's not too much education in our homeland, in Canada, about who we are, who we were, and our structures, our systems, and our Anishinaabe philosophy before the arrival of the settlers. And that's the big missing piece with the deniers. They're not familiar with how it is that we came to be, and how it is that we were already here when they arrived, and it permeates everything, everywhere, and every day we are challenged by that same question: how do we do this? Well, Stephanie has talked about some of that, the education. Come to our communities, come to our lodges. Come and visit us where we are. Encourage people to be inclusive with us. Share with us. Don't be afraid of us. We have much to share and much to teach. There was a time, as a child, I remembered that we had 4 foundations and teachings. And those 4 foundations were, we had to have a spirit name, because a spirit name gave us purpose. The next one was our clan, because our clan was our spirit that would guide us and be with us always, so we were never alone. The third thing that we were given as Anishinaabe was a way of life, how to live a good life here on this earth. And the fourth one was choice. And of course, with all that, there's language. All of that was taken. By the time I came out of the residential school, I was like a zombie. Didn't even know who I was or why I was here on this earth even. And it's taken a long, long time to come to the point of understanding who I am and why I'm here and what it is that I need to do here on this earth for work. We're all here for a purpose on this earth. And but I did not find that out until after years and years of bewilderment, of chaos happening in my life. Not understanding why I was even here. And so to your question, we're open to anyone who wants to listen, who wants to share, who wants to learn anything about us. There are, like Stephanie said, there are no secrets. We have no secrets. Miigwech for the opportunity.
For us at the NCTR, you know, there's not a day that I don't get an email from a denier. Some days it's, you know, I open up my email and that's the first thing I see. As Kim also noted, who was former ED at the TRC and the NCTR, we have access to the records. Everything that is there in black and white. You hear and you see handwritten letters from parents, mothers, fathers, asking about where their children are. How could you have buried my child without telling me where they ended up? You see administrators in church, back and forth letters between them, saying that it's too expensive to put their child's body on a train in order to send them home to give them proper burial and dignity. That is all there in black and white and very, very detailed. And I think that once you open up those records and make them available through education and get the records into the hands of the community so that people can share that information, then that power remains with the people, our people, so that they can, you know, piece together those facts. And paired with the survivor narratives that we hold, Barb and I, as well as Kim and members at the table, have been all across this country, speaking with survivors in every corner, coast to coast to coast. No matter where we went, you heard stories of death. You heard stories of children that have gone missing. The NCTR continues to research that, as we had mentioned earlier. So we've reviewed all those records, and I think that it's fact-based, and deniers have to really stop. And you see websites that are being created. You know the origins of these people. People become very focused. You know, we are working closely with the National Advisory Committee, who have brought up the possibility of legislation and to help support that and the creation of that, so that there is a law created in order to deal with that. And, you know, it's problematic, it's difficult. You know, I was witness to many, many people across this land, and I can tell you, paired with those documents, which need to be very publicly accessible, is really key and crucial. And we're working to do that. Everything is not perfect right now, and we know that and understand that, but through the minds of people like Honorable Sinclair and Kim, who we work very closely with at OSI, we're going to take some action so that we can get that information out into Canadians' hands as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Senator Levicaine-Benson.
Thank you, Chair. So my question, I really want to dig into the denialism. Perhaps the most violent that I've seen is academic denialism. And for my colleagues, to give you some context, the 3 commissioners of the TRC came to Edmonton about 7 or 8 years ago and did a fantastic presentation to a packed auditorium. And a University of Alberta professor stood up in the Q&A and said, "Why should I teach the TRC final report when it's not peer-reviewed?" And so, you know, I wonder if you've come across this problem in academia around this rigid, positivistic, you know, gaze that some academics hold. Arrogant. Yes, for sure. And if you've come up across it, and if you have had any success in countering it.
The center itself, I mean, there are articles, websites, I guess, from academics that have, you know, published inaccurate facts. The focus, I can tell you right now, has been on survival of the NCTR, so that the denialism is kind of it is a priority, but it comes second nature in order to getting the records to the center, working with survivors and committees. And that doesn't mean that we're leaving it unaddressed. We've just last week written an op-ed that they're currently pitching in regard to denialism and what those impacts are and how we should address them and what Canadians need to know and understand. So again, we are a small team serving a country, but we are actively doing what we can in order to combat that. And, you know, we work very closely with survivors, and at every opportunity they join us. And so I think that the importance of honoring and respecting the survivors and, again, the records and ensuring that we have everything that we can and need to, at our disposal is really important. And that's the only way that I see that we're going to be able to sincerely take action so that the mass majority of people understand, know, are educated as to what really happened in this country. And when the children were found, it wasn't only here in Canadians that were interested in what happened in residential schools, but it was the world. You know, we did hundreds of interviews right around the globe, and we continue to get asked for updates as to what's happening in that country, in this country. And that's what we need to continue to do, to engage not only here on this soil, but around the world.
If there's anything that we can do to help with that, especially from the academic perspective, because that gets in the way of properly training our teachers, you know, and it even in the way that scientists might see burial grounds. I think that if this panel this committee can do something, we'd be very interested as well.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add that each time a denier says something, it takes us right back to when I would play in amongst the graves, and I would, you know, casually tell teachers or other adults, and we weren't believed. And also when I was taking the statements, many people spoke of graves, but they weren't believed. And so each time that we're not believed, it's a form of the continued lateral violence against us, and it further induces us and triggers us into that trauma. We're still not believed. What do you have to do to be believed? We have the proof.
Thank you for that, and you know, certainly up to us as parliamentarians to confront the denialism whenever we see it, and because it has no place in our society. So I want to mention that. Senator Greenwood.
Hi, Elder Cameron, for your opening us the day, this session, in a good way. I also want to recognize the work, Ms. Scott, and that you do and your team does on behalf of all of us. So, hi. I'm really interested in your statement around education is the way forward, and the number of examples that you've given us today, the work that you do and the magnitude of that work when we're talking 12 million people on $1 million. Like, that's just unbelievable that you can even hardly get anything done. I think that's just a real crime, and that I would certainly be supportive of seeing that budget increase. As you speak about denialism, so I want to just say something here, and then I'm going to talk an education question. As we've been speaking about that, I cannot help but think about the overarching colonial experience or the colonial realities that we live in, underlied by concepts of power, land, resources, and colonization of our own minds. And I cannot help but think about those large concepts when we're trying to think about education and the changing of that. And I absolutely believe that will change with the generations behind us, coming behind us, and that we educate all of our children about these lived realities of the First Peoples of this land. So I'm really thinking about that too, and I'm thinking about newcomers that are coming to Canada. We hear about it all the time, and I'm wondering how we can provide education for them as they come to these shores about this lived reality, because I'm not convinced that people coming here are aware of these realities. I mean, we often talk about people that have lived here all their lives, but there are people coming all the time. And how can we educate them better, too, so that they don't get caught up in the colonial experience? But we want them to know what they're coming to. Would you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Scott?
Do you want? Go ahead.
Let me speak to this. Thank you for that. I approximately 7-8 years ago, I worked in a job where my focus was to train people in a regional health authority, a major organization, and so I never knew who I was going to get in my learning circle, and whether it would be a doctor, a surgeon, a dietary person, housekeeping. But on one particular occasion, I had a young lady challenger, and I was really happy for her questions. But she questioned why do the Indigenous people, why do the Anishinaabe people complain? And you know, as an immigrant, she was very happy to be here, and I said, yes. You know, I understand what you're saying. I said, but if you sit where I'm sitting, I said, where do you go? Where do you go to practice your culture, to speak your language, to do your ceremonies? You go to your own homeland. And there you have it. You can return anytime and be home and do all of those things that you grew up with. We over here, Canada is our homeland. This is where we were placed. And unfortunately, our language, our culture, our beliefs, all of that has been taken from us. And it's very difficult day to day just surviving. There's nowhere to run. Where do we go? Where do we go to find that? And at once she understood. It's that simple, but it's that profound at the same time. Miigwech.
For me, I think, and this is kind of a personal reflection, you know, and where I've come from and what I've lived in. When I went back home to my community, I was welcome home with a sweat and a water drum ceremony and invited to sit with our elders, people from my family that I didn't know. So can you imagine the possibility or understanding that could be provided, that part of the process when you are taking in newcomers, that they work with the traditional peoples of the territory through a ceremony that's not paper or, you know, swearing an oath, and that understanding and clarity has been instrumental in me making a change in my life. I think if we are going to live together in harmony, that's one step forward. It's not that everyone will, you know, migrate to that, but it's just the experience and the understanding. And I've seen remarkable change with people, even people that are on the fence about what the truth is of this country, change or have that physical empowerment and understanding of who we really are in this country. And there are many, many people across this land, and we've met many of them along the way during the TRC that have led us and guided us, and I think I'm better for it. So perhaps even thinking of that way forward could be good.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Greenwood. Well, this is complete, so the time for this panel is now complete. And I wish to again thank our witnesses, Ms. Scott and Elder Cameron, for joining us today, and all witnesses for providing some very powerful testimony. Thank you very much for that. And that brings us to the end of our meeting, and the meeting is now adjourned.